Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we are going to be looking at something that it's been brought up a lot in the media lately, um, and it's the idea of franchise fatigue. Now, this is just more my opinion on whether or not it's an actual real thing, or whether or not, franchise fatigue is an actual thing. And I'm just gonna kind of I'm gonna dissect a little bit of what kind of the definition of franchise fatigue is, and then we're gonna just go into basically a little conversation about it. So first is the idea that it's been brought up a lot with Star Wars, especially, is that franchise fatigue is you are getting too much of something at once and it needs to be spread out over a longer period of time and more sparse so that people don't get tired of it and get bored of it, because if it's the idea of the same thing over and over again, people are going to get bored of it. And people have mentioned it. Oh, the MCU will have it eventually. They brought it up with Star Wars, they brought it up with Fast and Furious, Pirates of the Caribbean, and so on and so forth. So the idea is sound. I don't have an issue with the idea. I have an issue with people implementing it. And some people, even people that I know, have said like, oh well, the MCU is putting on too many movies every year. They can't keep it up. They're never going to be able to keep it up. And the reason why I disagree with it, even in the case of Star Wars, I kind of disagree with it because everybody was saying, "Oh, that's too much Star Wars at once." The original trilogy had 3 years in between it. The prequels had 3 years in between them. Um, this needs to be more spread out. It can't be a movie every year. Because the idea was they were going to have a mainline film every year and then a spin-off film every year. Which is why we got Force Awakens, then Rogue One, then Last Jedi, then Solo. Now we're getting Episode 9 this year, and then they're going to take a break after that. But I don't necessarily think that the idea itself is bad to have a film every year. I think what happens is if you don't have good quality people working on those films and you're not putting out quality movies that your fan base is going to enjoy and like, then you're not going to then the movies are going to start doing less and less because you're not putting out a good product. You're stagnating. And I think that's more of the problem is stagnation as opposed to fatigue. Because fatigue would be like, okay, there it's not bad, but we're just getting too much of it. That's kind of the idea, and or it could be bad too. It could be a combination of things, but that shouldn't necessarily be the case with films, because if you make a really good film, a great example is, there's a lot of other things that go into it, but a great example is Avengers Endgame, where, I think it's the 22nd film in the MCU, and it made more money than half the other films combined. So, you know, I'm not seeing fatigue there necessarily. And people are saying, okay, it's a bubble, it's going to pop. Some movies are going to do less than others. That's just the way it works. But if they can keep the profits to a point where they're still getting a good amount of money back from these films, they're going to keep making them. The problem is when you lose the quality, and quality is that huge question mark I have, and that's why I think a lot of the stuff happened with Last Jedi, and going forward from that is people were not necessarily complaining. Majority of people were not complaining about Star Wars fatigue until after Last Jedi, because Last Jedi sucked. And then Solo came out, and everybody was saying Solo sucked. So you kind of you soured the fan base, but everybody's saying, "Oh, it's franchise fatigue." No, it's not franchise fatigue. It's you put out a shitty product. And again, you can see this with Marvel. For the most part, they put out relatively good products that their fan base enjoys, and those products are returned to them and their fans return that them putting out a good product by paying the money to see and to purchase the media that they put out. Now, if Marvel starts putting out, films like Captain Marvel on a regular basis, people are going to start screaming franchise fatigue because the product has lost its general quality. So I think it's less of too much too fast and more of too much not good enough, uh, as opposed to the other argument. Now, I could be wrong on that. Some people might think of it as what I just mentioned, but as far as I can tell, most people tend to go with the idea that it's not necessarily bad, but we're getting too much of it at once, and that's why people are reacting viscerally to it. And I don't see it that way. I see people reacting badly to things that are not well made. If you make well made films, you can carry franchises for years and years and years and years and years. And you can look at stuff like, I mean, even though it's a bit more spaced out, you can look at stuff like James Bond. James Bond had 20 has is releasing its 25th film. I think either later this year or next year, and I think it's next year actually. And nobody screams that there's James Bond fatigue. Obviously, a lot of this other stuff is in a lot closer of a time frame. The MCU has 22 films in 11 years, so it's different. Where James Bond is, I think, over 50 years at this point, but it still has a, yeah. Actually, sorry. Now that I think about that, I think it's over 60 years. But you have to understand that just because you're getting a lot of something doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It's bad if it's bad quality and it does not do if it does not do the job that it is supposed to do, which is to satisfy the viewer. And this kind of goes back to a lot of other things I've talked about before with demographics and this stuff involving your fan bases and things like that. So, but Marvel has found a good groove. The problem is if they escape from that groove, if they stop making good superhero stories and move into making stories that are about social justice stuff or current or putting in certain things that are very decisive among people, they're going to see a drop in revenue eventually because the MCU effect will wear off, and everybody claims that the MCU effect because that's why Captain Marvel did $1 billion and all this, and I can see that. And really, I think the best way to kind of gauge uh, some quality out of this stuff is you just have to watch the films. And the thing is that you have to watch how the films will age because some of these films are not going to age well. I don't think Captain Marvel is going to age well. I think people are going to look back on that and they're going to say, okay, yeah, it made a buttload of money, but it's not that good. They're going to kind of look at that like the Transformers films. It's like, yeah, they made a lot of money, but they kind of suck. At least after the first one. So it does lend itself to stuff like that, and I think Star Wars is a bit of a special example when people cite that because we were used to getting constant streams of Star Wars because it was on television too. You had the Clone Wars that ran for 6 seasons. It's coming back for its seventh, and you had Star Wars had a presence for the most part, and when the stuff got good nobody complained. If the stuff was good, if the stuff is good, if the stuff stays good, nobody complains. But if the stuff starts to lose quality and you start to lose viewers or they take a right turn in a direction the fans don't like, then you start hearing franchise fatigue. So I personally believe that franchise fatigue, as it's defined, how I've stated it here, does not actually exist. I don't think it exists at all. I think that stagnation exists, and that's what I choose to think of it as, is stagnation. When you lose the quality of the things you're making and you go away from your fan base, the base that's been carrying you all the way, that's what you see. You see a drop off in profits. You see a change in what you're bringing in as opposed to what you were doing before. So that's kind of my feelings on it. I'd like to know what your feelings are in the comments below. Do you think the same way about stuff like Star Wars and Marvel and a lot of other big franchises that are around these days? Fast and Furious, stuff like that. Do you think that there is such a thing as franchise fatigue, or do you believe that it's kind of a fallacy like I do? Um, Anyway, put your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button, hit the bell for notifications, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?